Good afternoon, everyone. Let's settle in, and thank you for joining this very exciting lecture. I'd like to introduce you to myself first. In case you haven't met me before, I'm Janet Bellato, the Dean of the College of Arts and Creative Enterprises. And I'd like to introduce you to the acting provost, Catherine Nickerson, who is joining us this morning, and we'll do a little introduction.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We're also being joined by Dubai, I understand, with a video link as well. Distinguished guests and members of the ZU community, very nice to see so many of our art and design students here with us today. I'm delighted to welcome the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation to Zayed University, together with Sir Clive Gillinson, on the occasion of the Riwaq Al-Fikr ADMAF talk. Zayed University and ADMAF share a long-standing partnership rooted in a mutual commitment to advancing arts education and supporting young creative talent, those of you in this room. We've collaborated on many educational programs, competitions, exhibitions, and tasks that have provided you with exposure to global practitioners and creative industry leaders. Collaborations like this one not only enhance our students' academic experiences, but also reinforce the university's role in shaping the cultural dialogue in the UAE and beyond. On a personal note, I'm particularly thrilled to have Sir Clive here with us today as my first degree was in classical music, and perhaps not many of you know that, in fact. The London Symphony Orchestra and Carnegie Hall are two of the most important cultural icons of this era, and I've been lucky enough to hear one and visit the other. I heard the Boston Symphony Orchestra play at Carnegie Hall in October 1994, on my first visit to New York City, including Itzhak Perlman playing Bernstein and Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man, something I'll remember for the rest of my life. So welcome, Sir Clive. I very much look forward to hearing your address.
Robin from ADMAF will be speaking next.
Hi, everyone. Sabah al-khair. I'm Robin Solomon from the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation, in charge of our programs for education and community outreach. And it's a great pleasure to introduce to you today Sir Clive Gillinson, who is, as you've heard, the Executive and Artistic Director at Carnegie Hall, one of the premier and most iconic cultural institutions, not just in the United States, but in the world. He's had that position since 2005, and prior to that was 35 years with the London Symphony Orchestra, first as a musician, as a cellist, and later as the managing director. At the London Symphony Orchestra, he revitalized the global presence and led to the creation of major new initiatives, such as the LSO Live, LSO Discovery, and the development of LSO St. Luke's, a landmark education and community venue. At Carnegie Hall, Sir Clive has expanded the institution's artistic vision and educational reach, launching innovative festivals, founding the National Youth Orchestra of the United States, and introducing Ensemble Connect to support emerging artists and music education in public schools. He also led the creation of the Wheel Music Institute's Resnick Education Wing and launched Carnegie Hall Plus, a global video on-demand platform for music lovers. Sir Clive's work reflects a deep belief that music should be a powerful and accessible force for inspiration, education, and connection across communities and cultures. I think many in this room today share that belief with him, and I ask you to join me now in welcoming him to speak with you this morning, and I encourage you to have questions ready to ask him so that you can learn and grow in your careers in promoting music and arts and community and cultural connections. Thank you, Sir Clive.
Good morning, everyone. And Robin, good morning. And just to say, in fact, Robin and I have worked together in the past, in fact, in your previous life, when I was in Israel and when we did projects working with administrators, both Arab Israeli and Jewish Israeli, which Robin was very much involved with. So it was such important work you did then and continue to do here now. So I'm very, very honored to speak here at Zayed University. I spoke here, I think, about 15 years ago, but I can't believe how Abu Dhabi has changed, grown, developed in that time. It's really extraordinary. And I think also in visiting the Abrahamic house yesterday with my wife, Anya, one of the things that both of us felt so strongly is that in a world which has become more and more polarized, the way Abu Dhabi is looking at bringing people together is something that is so important for the world. And I think, you are an oasis of that sort of tolerance, of community, creating community, ensuring that we all understand our shared humanity as well. Now, really, because of exactly that, the divided world we live in, what I really wanted to do today was talk about values, since values, of course, underpin everything that we as human beings do with our entire lives, but also everything that major institutions stand for. And I feel, both in my time running the LSO, 21 years running the London Symphony Orchestra, and now 20 years so far running Carnegie Hall, the most important single thing one has to do is define one's values, but then make sure you live by them in terms of everything that you do. And so I really just wanted to share some of the things I'd learned in that way over my time in music, which is both as a musician initially, as Robin mentioned, but then in management, which has been most of my life. Now, funnily enough, as a player in the London Symphony Orchestra, as a cellist, the last thing in the world I ever wanted to do was become a manager. Because I thought we as musicians were the creative people and managers did the really boring jobs, which were just really pushing paper around and sort of kind of just, making the straightforward decisions. But I mean, the curious thing that happened to me, moving from what I thought was the creative role of being a musician, where in an orchestra, in fact, you're not able to be very creative because everything is defined by the conductor. So you're an artisan much more than an artist. You have to play in exactly the way the conductor wants. And it's not that isn't wonderful. It's a wonderful profession. But the fact of the matter is it does not fulfill one's individual creativity as a human being. And management, on the contrary, was exactly the opposite. I found that we spend our entire day in management, every minute of every day. If you can't make 1 + 1 = more than 2, if you can't use the creative human forces to make things happen, which are, more than what is obvious, then you're failing as a manager. So my life in that way has been, both dimensions of it have been the absolute antithesis of what I expected. Now, the only reason I went into management was our orchestra, the London Symphony Orchestra, it moved into a new concert hall in 1982, a long time ago. And within a year, we were on the verge of bankruptcy because the manager got it completely wrong. And so the board said to him he had to change. He was not willing to change. He thought We had to stay with what we believed in, which was just a model that simply didn't work. But he felt, we should stay with that, and that the country couldn't afford to let the London Symphony Orchestra go. Well, unfortunately for him, the country actually was perfectly happy to let the London Symphony Orchestra go. And in fact, the Arts Council of the time, which was the funding body, the government funding body, was looking to find a way to reduce the number of orchestras it had to fund. So he was on the verge of giving them a gift, which was actually giving them one less orchestra to fund. So the board sacked him because the orchestra was in such a dire position. They looked for a manager, but they couldn't find a manager. So they thought in the end they'd get a player to go in for 3 months whilst they looked for a real manager. So I've no idea why they chose me. I've sometimes thought it was maybe because I was last out of the room or something. But whatever it was me. They asked to do it, just literally whilst we looked for a manager. After 3 months, they still couldn't find anybody. And they offered me the job. And I said no, because after 3 months, you have no idea if I'm the right person. And after 3 months, I have no idea if I want to do it, because I've never wanted to be a manager. And those first 3 months were a total nightmare, going in to run an organization where you know nothing about management. It was terrifying, and I hardly got any sleep ever. But one of the things that was really valuable, it taught me some very, very important life lessons, which are life lessons that I've carried forward ever since then. And I mean, it's hard to believe it in retrospect, but actually knowing nothing has certain advantages. I mean, not many, I promise, but some. And one of the things it taught me, one of the very first lessons I learned, was that questions are far more important than answers. Loads of people think they have answers to things. Most of the time, they haven't thought about them often enough or carefully enough. But in addition, everybody tends to think they can transfer their knowledge from another field, from one field to another. And it's almost always untrue. And so I don't know whether any of you have read the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. But the very interesting thing he explores within that book is that people who have acquired great skills in one area tend to think fast. They take lots of shortcuts in terms of their thinking, and they assume that all those learnings simply can be transferred. Well, almost always untrue. And so you've got to learn to think slow. You've got to learn to actually assess each thing in its own right. And that was one of the very first lessons I learned, because obviously going in as a manager, knowing nothing about management, all I could do was ask questions. And then at least you have a chance. You begin to realize if you just ask all the questions you can imagine, you have a chance of beginning to come up with good answers. So that was, I guess, the first very powerful lesson I learned. The second, actually, one of the things, there's an example which served me really well later in life as well. I remember when I came to Carnegie Hall, one of our trustees, and a very powerful trustee, and in America, arts organizations tend to be funded a lot. I mean, a lot of the big donations come from individuals. And this very powerful trustee had an idea that they wanted to do. This was in the early days when I'd become a manager. And I remember thinking, this is a terrible idea. But, so I went back to my team and they said, look, you can't say it's a terrible idea. Otherwise, this is the end of your job. You'll be gone. And so I thought, well, maybe what I should do, and I said to the chairman, this trustee has suggested this idea, would it be useful if I thought of every question we're going to have to answer if we're going to do the project that this trustee is suggesting? So the chairman said, yeah, terrific idea. Absolutely. So I sat down with my team and we thought up all the questions. And then when I walked in the door for the first meeting with my chairman, after I'd suggested this to him, he said, have you, thank you very much for sending me all the questions. We're not doing this project, are we? So the questions had told him that it was a project that didn't work. I didn't have to say it didn't work. The questions told him that. And that was a very, very powerful lesson. And it's something I've used ever since, because very often, particularly in America, where your biggest donors have huge amounts of money, they have a lot of power within the institution, and it can be quite dangerous to say, I think you've got a bad idea. It doesn't go down very well. So if you engage them in asking questions, you can almost always arrive in the right place without ever telling anybody you don't like their idea. So it's something that has served me in good stead all the way through. The next thing I learned was money follows vision. Almost immediately I started, I heard about a project where this very famous cellist, Mstislav Rostropovich, who was somebody, I mean, I assumed he must be dead because he was, he was such a legend, but he was very much alive. He was going to be celebrating his 60th birthday. And I'd worshipped him from a distance. I'd never met him or anything. But I heard he was going to be celebrating his 60th birthday with 2 orchestras. And I thought, this is crazy. This is one of the greatest performers in the history of music who's ever lived. To be celebrating with 2 orchestras, the focus should be completely on him. So I went to his manager, and this was still in the very early days when we were on the verge of bankruptcy. And I went to his manager and I just said, this should not be. This man has to be, the tribute has to be done in the right way with the focus totally on him. And she said, well, the 2 orchestras are doing it with 2 orchestras. They can't each afford to do it on their own. And I said, we will do it. And she said, but hang on a minute. They are both in a financially good state, and they say they can't afford it. Your orchestra is on the verge of bankruptcy, and you're telling me you're going to do it. And I said, I promise we'll raise the money because that is the way it should be done. And so she went to him and she said, there's this lunatic at the London Symphony Orchestra. This is what he said. They are on the verge of bankruptcy, but they absolutely believe in you and they want to do it with you. And so he said, if he believes in me like that, I believe in him. I'll do it with them. And what's more, because I used to be a cellist, he said, if he was a cellist as well, that settles it. And those of you who know cellists know it's a big fraternity. All cellists like cellists. So he did bring it to us. We did raise the money. It became one of the key turning points in our life, going from being on the verge of bankruptcy to pulling the orchestra together and having a direction that was meaningful and that was really powerful. And having that decision to do something that was really, really important, even though theoretically we couldn't afford it, by going for something extraordinary, the money came in. So money followed vision, rather than us chasing money and seeing what you can do with the money that you're chasing. So that, again, was really, really important. Now, that's been something that's run through my life then. I mean, when we created the National Youth Orchestra of America, which Robin referred to, at Carnegie Hall, again, that was very much, I mean, it's a huge, huge project, but it captured people's imagination, and so the money came in. And then we created National Youth Orchestra Jazz and a younger National Youth Orchestra for players who had not had access to the best teaching, hadn't had all the opportunities that other players perhaps might have done. So all of those projects were funded because we believed in something that we thought was extraordinary, that had to happen. And so the money followed. The other thing we do, sorry, is there any water? I'm just a bit dry. I'm going to stop a second, otherwise I'll lose my voice. Thanks. One bottle's enough. Thank you. Well, great. Thank you very much. Another value that underpins everything we do is that we have to seek the extraordinary in everything we do. I mean, particularly in America, if you go with an idea, because most of the money that supports what we do, it's not like in Europe where I came from, where a lot of the money comes from government. In America, you've got to capture the imagination of individuals. And so if you go with a good idea, I mean, it's very hard to get somebody to feel really passionate and say, I've got this good idea I'd like you to do. I mean, you've got to go along and say, I've got this extraordinary idea, something that has to happen. Which in a way was like that Rostropovich 60th birthday series, like the National Youth Orchestra, all these projects. We try and say every project we come up with has to be extraordinary so that when you talk to anybody about it, your passion and your enthusiasm are going to become their passion and enthusiasm. And of course, like, if they're not interested, then they're not interested. But if they are, it's got to be something that captures their imagination. So, I mean, the good thing in that way about America, in terms of the funding model, has strengths and weaknesses, like every funding model. So in America, for instance, in 2007-8, when there was the big financial crisis, it was very dangerous because we had nothing to fall back on, because either you adjust your business and adapt to the situation you're in, or you have to, you're going to go under. You've got a problem. Whereas in Europe and a lot of other places, the fact is they actually got more government money when times got tough. In America, there's no help. So you have to adapt. But on the other hand, the positive in there is that in America, because you're appealing to individuals and it's their money in one way or another, you've got to capture their imagination. So that's why, in the end, I prefer the model, because I think you should only ever want to go for the extraordinary. So that is what we've done. And we also have tried another value that to us is really important, is looking at some of the very big major issues of the day. So we created festivals as soon as I arrived, and we looked at African American culture, because obviously, African American issues are a big, big problem in America. I mean, it's part of America's heritage that they have to address. So we felt we had to be looking at that, and that was from the very, very beginning in early 2000s. We did a very big project on that with the great singer Jesse Norman curating the series. We've looked at China, we've looked at Japan, Latin America, the countries that are going to be really important in the 21st century to America. But also we've looked at artists under oppression. So we looked at how somehow great artists, it doesn't matter how horrific the circumstances, they will still create great art. But it's not about the misery. It's about aspiration, it's about dreams, it's about inspiration. So we looked at the art that came out of slavery in America. We looked at the art that came out of the Holocaust, the art that came out of the Soviet Union under the horrific pressures people went through there. So, in every way, we tried to look at how it is that human beings will always create something that actually gives people a lift and takes them forward. So we've done that. Next year, we'll be looking at all the music and all the genres of American music, because it's the 250th anniversary of American independence, in fact, from Britain. So the 250th anniversary, when one thinks of what America has gifted the world in that way, it's Broadway, it's film music, country music, gospel, jazz. There are so many different forms of music, hip hop, it just goes on and on. So we're looking at all the gifts that America has given the world as well in that way. So all the time we're trying to tell stories, trying to look at things that really matter in terms of the future. Yeah. Is that better? This is on. Yeah. Can you hear better now? Do I need to start all over again? Okay. Then the next thing that's really, really important in the arts is the one, it's the corollary really of money follows vision, which is you don't chase money. It's very easy. A lot of people in the arts will think if somebody comes along and offers a lot of money, I ought to do what they're asking me to do. And it's very important that one stays absolutely with what one believes in, that you're really clear what your vision is, and you stay with that. And I'm not going to mention the country, because I'm much too diplomatic. But I remember there was one project we were doing for one country where we wanted to pay tribute to the culture of that country. And they sent the Ministry of Culture team over and everything. And we said, we'd really love to work with you on this. And so the minister said, fantastic, wonderful. This is what you're going to do. And we said, no, we're not. We want to pay tribute to your culture. You paying tribute to yourself is not quite the same thing. So it's really important that we define what we're going to do so that it actually pays tribute to the culture of your country. And I said, if you want, we're not going to try and do anything that's against the country. If you want, you can have a power of veto. If there's something you're upset about and you don't think we should be doing because you feel it doesn't reflect well, we won't do it. It's no problem. So everybody was smiles and it was fine. They went away and they said, we'll be back in 3 months. So we started working on the project and developing it. They came back in 3 months and I said, well, have you got some ideas of what you'd like to do? And they said, yes, this is what you're going to do. It was exactly the same. And they wanted to tell us. And they thought because we wanted their money, we would do exactly what we were told. And they even said to me, look, why is it Carnegie Hall doesn't do what it's told? We worked with this other institution and they did a festival around our country and they did what they were told. And I said, because it's important that it's a tribute to you and that it's curated in such a way that we understand our audiences, so it relates to our audiences, but also that it's a genuine tribute to your country. Because there is no meaning in a country or anybody paying tribute to themselves. It doesn't work. So in the end, we weren't able to work with them because they thought we would have to give in because of the money. And so in the end, we didn't work with them. Now we're great friends because they loved the festival. They thought it was incredible. And now they kind of trust us, I guess. But the interesting thing was they thought they could impose it because of money. And that's always the death trap for cultural organizations, but I think probably for organizations in general, that you've got to know who you are, what you believe in, what you represent, and stay true to your values. Another value for us that's very important is how to use music to bring people together. Excuse me a second. Now, part of the reason we created the National Youth Orchestras of America was because we wanted them to travel around the world so that the young players could meet other young players all around the world and engage with other young players. So one really built relationships between young people worldwide. So that is exactly what we've done. Our National Youth Orchestra this summer will be in Japan, in China, Hong Kong, and Korea. Our National Youth Jazz Orchestra will be traveling around South America, and our younger National Youth Orchestra will be at the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland. So every year they go to a different part of the world, and every year they act as cultural ambassadors for America, for their own country. Now, we want everything to go both ways. I think all cultural exchange is not just about saying, what has America got that it should be offering other people? That is one thing we do where we're connecting with young people. But we want to bring Arab artists. We want to build more in terms of bringing Arab artists to Carnegie Hall. We bring Chinese artists, Japan, Korea, Africa, South America. We bring artists from all around the world, and we build relationships that are absolutely two-way, and that is what we want to do. It's part of the reason why I'm here. We want to make sure we're doing that with the Emirates and with the Arab world, certainly in this part of the Arab world at the moment. So, you know, that's a long-term aspiration. But last summer, we had an incredible project where we brought together a Pan-African youth orchestra, so kids from all over Africa, a Venezuelan youth orchestra, so South American kids, a Pan-European youth orchestra, as well as, I'm just trying to think, not just China, other countries as well. But in addition, we brought young Ukrainian musicians over, and we brought Arab and Jewish Israelis over to perform as part of the group. So in the end, we had 700 young musicians from all around the world, both performing as individual orchestras, but then at one point, we had all 700 playing together in one huge venue where the orchestra was actually bigger than the audience. But it was an extraordinary experience for every one of those kids, and for them to be meeting other kids from all around the world. Now, that's not a project we can do every year. It's too expensive. So we're trying to create partnerships where it's done not just in America. We'll do it in New York at Carnegie Hall probably every 5 or 6 years. But then we'll look as well at seeing whether China can host it and whether other countries can host it as well. We're getting there. Another value that is fundamentally important as well to us is that every single thing you do matters. And again, I mean, all these values are not just values for Carnegie Hall, they're values in life. And I'll just give you an example of why that is so important. Again, Slava Rostropovich, the cellist I was talking to you about, under the Soviet Union, there was a writer, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who you may have heard of, who was sent to the Gulag, to the political prisoner camps, because of his writing against the Soviet Union. And when he was released, nobody would take him in. He had no home, he had no nothing. And so Rostropovich, this cellist I was talking about, took him into his home because that was the only place he could go. Immediately he did that, all of Rostropovich's work disappeared. He had no more concerts, no nothing. He was a non-person. And so, he would walk down the street, and where all his friends used to, when they were coming in the other direction, they'd see him and they'd be greeting him. Suddenly, nobody dared, because of the Soviet Union being the police state it was, when people did come down the street, nobody dared to even talk to him. So somehow or other, wherever he was walking, nobody recognized him. They were always on the other side of the street. They never saw him. And as I said, all his concerts disappeared. And then one day the phone went and he was told, you've got a concert in Siberia. It's in a huge aircraft hangar, which holds several thousand people. So he went up there with his pianist. He arrived and they arrived and there was nobody around. So he said, well, what's happened? They said, look, we're really sorry, but the people who were going to do it completely forgot to publicize the concert. And he said, you mean there's nobody here? And they said, well, look, there's 8 people. There's these 8 people who were in the political prison camp, who somehow heard about the concert and have walked through the snow for 3 days to get here so that they could be here for your concert. But obviously, in an aircraft hangar for 3,000 people, you're not doing a concert for 8 people. And he said, on the contrary, I am. So he played the concert for 8 people, and he played all his encores, all the extra pieces he would have played for a standing ovation, for the standing ovation from 8 people. But the point about it was, it didn't matter that it was only 8 or 3,000. For him, he was committed to doing it, and he was going to do it, and he was going to do it to the best of his ability in every way and give his all. And that was who he was. And that's what all greatest artists are. And that is what's so important in terms of one's approach to art, one's approach to life. And one of the things I remember once being in his room when somebody came in and said to him, "What's your favorite piece of music?" And he said, "It's the piece I'm playing today, otherwise I shouldn't be playing it." Which is actually very profound, because it meant that whatever he was doing now was the thing that had to be the most important thing to him at that moment, or don't do it. And that was how he lived his life. And that's why those sort of people are the people I learned so much from. Another value that's really important and is fundamental to every great artist I've ever known, and that is humility. And funnily enough, when people speak to me and say, you know, of the great artists you've known, which do you think is the most important value? And I always say it is humility, because if people don't want to be better all the time, then the journey's over. It's finished. I mean, you know, basically, they're not going anywhere. And I mean, Leonard Bernstein always used to say, the great conductor, composer, he always used to say, if I can't be better tomorrow than I am today, then I should finish. And he exemplified it by the fact, even, you know, in his 60s, there was music that he'd been doing all his life, Tchaikovsky symphonies. He'd been conducting this music all his life. He was one of the greatest exponents. And in his 60s, he threw the music away so that he could start studying it again as if he'd never studied it before. And it's that approach to life and to music, and it's the same thing really, that exemplified all the greatest artists I've known. Another value is idealism. And all of them, again, all the people I've known, they actually are idealists, and they believe in dreaming, in trying to do something really extraordinary. Now, I'm just going to close with just touching, because of the sort of world we're living in, which is this world, you know, really almost of zero-sum gain, which is almost everywhere now. The thinking is, if I win, you've got to lose. Or if you win, I'm going to lose. So therefore, it's just a fight about who's going to win. Whereas, in fact, the most important things in life happen when people work together, and what they do together is worth more than they can do on their own. And if we think in terms of winning or losing, we lose all the opportunity to do extraordinary things. And it makes me think of the book Man's Search for Meaning. There was a man called Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist, who during the war, he was Jewish, he was in the Holocaust, he was in one of the prisoner camps, and you know, almost everybody, as you know, was murdered, killed. Somehow or other, he survived. And he wrote this extraordinary book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is about the fact that he feels he survived because almost everybody else in the prison camp, you know, was actually thinking, how do I survive? They were looking after themselves, and most of them died in the end. He only thought about, how do I help other people deal with their pain and their suffering? And somehow or other, he came out the other end. And he said the only reason he feels he did come out the other end was because he was focusing on other people and not himself. And one of the interesting things I found when I became a manager, because as a young musician, you tend to be very focused on yourself. All musicians are trying to be the best player they can be. They're trying to be successful, trying to win competitions, everything. When I became manager, I realized after about 2 or 3 years, I had completely changed. I hadn't realized I was changing. And the reason I changed was I'd gone from being somebody who was focused on my own playing. As manager of an orchestra, you are thinking about, who does this orchestra serve? So it's all about service. And that in the end, just like the Viktor Frankl story, is really about, to me, what we should all be thinking of. I mean, whether it's about our own individual lives, whether the institutions we work for, but service and how we actually help other human beings, how we make life better for other human beings, how we do things that actually support other human beings to fulfill their potential and talent. And that is what we try to do at Carnegie Hall every day of the week. So that's just given you a sense of the sort of values we believe in and that we pursue. But I'd love to hear any thoughts all of you have got, so that we can actually just talk about it. And if those things mean something to you, please let me know.
Thank you. So any questions or comments thinking about how this applies to you in your future? Thinking about creativity, collaborating. Some of you senior students are actually working on your projects to bring out in the world and your next steps. Some of you have been thinking about managing in your future careers.
Or disagreements.
Or disagreement, fair
Everybody
enough.
disagrees as well.
Hello, it's an honor to be here with you, Sir Clive. I have a question on the application of your work when you were in Oxford. You said it was a structured organization or environment. To being kind of restricted, to having the freedom to do anything you'd like. Do you think the structured environment helped you, or is it something negative?
I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, I was originally, it sounds like a tangent, but it isn't. I originally went to university to study mathematics. And then I realized I'd made a mistake. It had to be music. So I switched and I went to study music. Now, the interesting thing about the similarity between mathematics and music is you need tremendous discipline, tremendous structure. But in the end, if you do all of that with total dedication, it buys you the freedom to be creative. And it's one of the things I loved about mathematics. I mean, if people hate mathematics, the last thing in the world they'll ever say is it's creative. My son hates mathematics, and he doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say it's creative. But the point is, it's the structure and the discipline and the rigor and the framework and the strategy that actually buy you the freedom in the end, because you can only have freedom within certain disciplines. If it's just free for the sake of being free, because in the 60s, a lot of the arts, everybody just said, oh, you don't need to learn, you don't need to study, you don't need to learn anything. Just be yourself, be an artist, be free. In the end, most of what people created was not of any interest, because there was no discipline, no rigor, no structure, no nothing. So that what they created really didn't either have a lot of meaning. So, and all the greatest teachers, they all expect you to be incredibly disciplined and strong and structured in order to then move on and use that for the freedom. And I think it's quite hard to understand that, where one's doing all the tough stuff, which is the difficult things, when you can't see them freedom at all, that it's buying you. And yet ultimately it does. And I find exactly the same thing in management as well. And that is, you have to be very disciplined and very rigorous about how you run a business, or it'll fail. And yet at the same time, if you're not creative, if you're not, and I said earlier, you've got to make 1 + 1 = more than 2 every day of the week with almost every decision you make in management. But you only buy the freedom to do that when you've actually established the framework that we were talking about. So it's a really good question.
Another question.
Okay, hello, Sir Clive. So you're someone that has like a lot of life experience, and you're in this position where you get to help and uplift people that have like a shared passion every day. And I wanted to ask, like, I know that takes like a lot of time. So my question is, what advice do you have for like young people that want to make such a big impact and a change in such a short amount of time?
Well, firstly, you haven't got such a short amount of time. Everybody's got a lifetime. And I mean, lifetimes are getting longer and longer. So, and most people now will have more than one profession in their life. They'll have, lots of things they pursue. But I think in the end, everybody has to do the things that actually matter to them, but it's not doing it just for themselves. I mean, when I was a student, as I said, I was practicing the music incredibly hard. I used to practice 8 or 9 hours every day. The work you put in is crazy. I mean, you work so hard, but there's a degree to which that's very much about putting you at the center of your world. And I think it's only as time goes by one realizes that if you start thinking about how do you use what you've learned to transform other people's lives, and really do something that contributes to human beings in general. I mean, you think of the world we're in today. I mean, there is so much anger. There's so many, there's so many things people can't even talk about. And yet, if in one way or another, education could help us to enable every person to fulfill their talent, we know we would have a much better world. Now, one of the interesting things we do at Carnegie Hall is we work in Sing Sing prison, which is a prison for people who, a lot of the crimes have been terrible. And we've been working there for 16 years, helping the prisoners both to write music, to create music, perform and play. And the interesting thing is, a lot of prisoners we've worked with in that 16 years have been released. Not one of them has ever gone back to prison. So in other words, even there, where people might think, oh, if somebody was a murderer or if somebody did this terrible crime, there's no hope for them. There's nothing one can do. Even in a situation like that, and interesting enough, our players who do that work, it's some of the toughest work they do. But the players who do that work find it also some of the most rewarding work they do, because they can see how they're changing lives and giving people hope, aspiration, belief in themselves, a sense that they actually maybe do have something they can contribute to the world where they thought they were complete failures and they couldn't contribute anything. So it can work in 100 different ways. But it's finding the thing that you do well, that you care about, but it's not just about you. It's then how do you use that in a way that's going to change life around you.
We have a question from our Dubai campus. So I think they'll open the microphone. The camera there isn't working, unfortunately.
Hello. I have a question that's more about music, and it's a fun question. If you were stuck on a desert island, which piece of music would you get and why?
Sorry, if I was what, where?
If you were on a desert island, stranded on a desert island.
On a desert island. I think it would probably be Bach, because you never. I mean, this is one of the things about great music anyway, but great art altogether, and that is you never reach the point at which you have learned everything and understood everything you can about any work of great art. And with Bach, it's so pure, it appears to be so simple, and yet it is so profound. I mean, let me just give you a little story, which again is Rostropovich, this extraordinary cellist. He waited until he was about 50 to record, or even a bit older, to record all the Bach cello suites, the 6 suites that are written for solo cello. Now, he decided he was so terrified of recording them because he was so in awe of that music, that what he did is, his recording company had been pushing him for 20, 30 years to record them, and he wouldn't, because he said, I've got to be able to record them. And if I don't like it, if I don't think it's good enough, I throw it away. if somebody else pays for it, I can't do that. So he looked and looked and looked until he found a church. He found a church in France, which was where he thought exactly the right sound for that music. He went there, he paid the recording engineer, the filming, he paid for everything. And he just stayed in that church and kept on playing that music until he felt he'd arrived at the point where, at least for that point in his life, it was the best he could do it. So he listened to them, he edited them, and at the end he decided he was willing to release them. But if he hadn't been, he'd have thrown all that money away, he'd have thrown all that work away, finished, because he was so terrified of Bach. And so it was very interesting. So then his recording company did pay him for them. It became the best-selling Bach ever for the cello, and an extraordinary success. But the point is that combines two of the things I was talking about. One is humility, that he felt that about the music, but it's also why Bach means so much to so many people. And I mean, there's a very interesting phrase that Einstein came up with, because his unbelievable ability was to find a simple way of saying the most complicated things. And he said, anybody can make something more complicated. The hardest thing in life is to make things simple. And that is Bach. Bach is utterly pure, utterly simple, and extraordinarily profound.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there any other last questions? Oh, okay, I think this will be the last questions.
Hi. I would like to ask, in terms of finance, how are you able to detach money from your work when big projects require big funding?
Well, when I first went into management, I said there was two things I would never do. One was make speeches. So here we are. Number two was raise money. Because I thought, how do you ask somebody you know for money? Impossible. But then after a while, I realized asking for money is not asking for money. Raising money is about sharing vision. In other words, sharing the ideas and all the things I've been talking this morning about. I mean, that everything you create has to be so extraordinary that you just love to talk about it and share it. It's about that, and it's about relationships, creating relationships with people. And so very often, you don't actually ask for money. And it happened to me the other day. It was one of the most moving things that happened. I went for coffee with my wife to some people who we've become very friendly with. And I've been talking to them about would they want to become involved with Carnegie Hall. And they sat us down for coffee and we started talking. And then they said, look, Clive, we've been thinking, we want to be involved and we're going to give you a big donation. And they offered us $10 million over 10 years, which is astounding, incredible. And I hadn't asked them for a cent. And it was because of the vision and because of the relationship. And so that is why, if you think you're raising money, you probably can't raise money, because if you're asking people for money, it's a horrible thing to do, and particularly since most of the time you're asking people my former chairman, he was joking, but only half joking. He said the reason he left New York and went to live on the West Coast is because he'd spent all his life asking everybody for money to support Carnegie Hall and the different institutions. And he said everybody was beginning to avoid him. So he thought he'd better go to the West Coast so he could start getting a new lot of friends, and start asking other people for money for some of the things he believed in. But he actually thought, it's half a joke, but it's also true. That there's a danger if you ask for money, people are going to run away too. So it's never about asking for money is the most important thing to remember.
Sir Clive. Oh. This is great.
Yeah, we have a question.
So my other question is, when you talked about the client and you had your own vision and they had their own vision, when do you know when to have your own vision and stick to it? Do you set that from the beginning, or is that something you develop?
No, it's from the beginning. You have to decide who you are, what you believe in. You've got to develop, I mean, all the things that some of the questions earlier, strategy, all of those things. You've got to have developed those ideas, and they've got to be about who you are as an institution, and what you exist to do. And I've talked about a lot of the things we exist to do at Carnegie Hall. Now, if somebody comes and says, could you do something completely different? We're going to give you a ton of money. We still won't do it. But what we will try and do, obviously, is say to them, but if you want to give us a lot of money, this actually meets some of the objectives you're seeking. And wouldn't you like to get involved in this, which is what we are doing? But if at the end of the day, they just simply want something that is a reflection of their vision, they should not be backing you, because they should only back you if they believe in your vision as an institution. If they think they've got to change your vision to back you, then they don't believe in you. And therefore, you don't deserve the money. You shouldn't have it. So, I mean, that is it's the simple answer, that you have to be absolutely true, both to your values, but also your objectives as well, and absolutely stay with those. And the example I gave of the country that wanted to transform the project we were doing, we would have failed completely if we'd allowed ourselves to be manipulated into accepting their money to do something we didn't believe in.
Sir Clive, thank you so much for your presence here today. It's been invaluable for our students across the various creative sections. And I think I myself have learned a lot today, or just recalled some very important elements about creativity and about vision, and how important your idea is to the steps you take forward. And it is you who have to believe in that idea first. So thank you. Thank you, ADMAF, for sponsoring this event today and bringing the Riwaq al-Fikra to Zayed University campus.
But can I just say, I mean, a thank you to all of you, but also to wish you all the best. I mean, I think if you're here, you're obviously remarkable people. It's a very demanding university, and and I very much hope we'll all get the chance to meet again. I mean, my wife and I, really want to come back to Abu Dhabi again. We love it here, and really, really good luck with all your careers as well. Thank you.
Did you come to stop the recording, brother? You're waiting.
Can I take a picture of you guys? Your fellow students and survivors? Let's get a little.